Hi, my name's John and this is my partner Michelle. And this is our 7-year-old 70,000 mile Tesla Model S.
Come with us as we travel through 9 countries from the south coast of the UK to the top of Norway. A journey of over 5,000 miles in a car that the tabloid press would have you believe has little to no battery performance left.
And let's see whether the Tesla charging network is up to the job of getting us all the way there and all the way back. Because if it is, Elon's paying for all the fuel.
Welcome to the long free ride.
Welcome back to the long free ride. In this episode, we put some serious miles under the wheels of the Tesla. We travel from Stockholm in southern Sweden to the northwest borders of the country to experience the Ice Hotel. Let's zoom in and take a look at the route. It's split over 2 days driving. The first leg takes us from Stockholm up to a town called Umeå, and then from Umeå up to the Ice Hotel. It's forecast to be 765 miles, with about 12 hours 45 minutes of driving and almost 4 hours of charging. Whilst in Stockholm, we hadn't charged the car, so we only had about 40% when we left, and therefore it wasn't long before we made our first stop of the day, with of course some coffee and cake.
So whilst en route to Umeå, I did a little bit of research. It's known for its museums, and the 2 that score most highly in visitor ratings are the Västerbottens Museum, which goes through the history of the indigenous Sami people and also traditional skiing techniques. Now, I'm no skier. There's many a story about me on ski slopes, which I will pass on this time round. The city of Umeå also has had several fires in their history, largely thanks to Russian attacks in 1714 and 1720, where it was literally burnt to the ground. However, the worst fire was in June 1888, which made 2/3 of its population homeless. And after this, 3,000 silver birch trees were planted along the wide avenues, apparently to prevent future fires from spreading. This is why it's known as the City of Birches. Whilst investigating Umeå, I also found out that it's on the Gulf of Bothana, so an inlet, and the river goes down into the Gulf. It's also famous for having 10 kilometres outside of the city some rock carvings from 3000 BCE, old enough for John to remember. And it's also been the home of Rally Sweden since 2022. So if you are a rally car fanatic, this might well be a place for you to come and visit.
Like many of the charging stations on our tour, this was part of a large retail park. Now, why we don't have these popping up in the UK, I really don't know. It makes you wonder whether it's down to planning, the will, or high rents from the landlords, who knows, or even the infrastructure. But they just don't seem to be there at the moment. We need to catch up. This Tesla Charger appears to have its cover missing. I don't know if someone's crashed into it or what, but get to see the insides. Our drive north continued, crossing waterways both large and small. So far on the trip we'd been listening to audiobooks as we drive, but today it was my 1980s and 90s playlist. It was a cracker. Sadly though, we can't allow you to hear that. Our next charge was at a town called Örnsköldsvik. Next to the Tesla Charger was a ski jump hill that really dominated the entire area. And actually the sort of runoff area where they slowed down was over the car park, and it was held up on pylons. It was really quite impressive. There was a restaurant, so being as we needed to charge for a reasonable amount of time, we took the opportunity to take a late lunch. After 70 miles or so on the road, we started to come into the outskirts of Umeå. The roads were quite wide and tree-lined, as Michelle has said earlier, and it wasn't long till we found our hotel. After dumping our bags in the room, we headed on out into the town, but more on that in a moment.
So the long free ride is back on the road again. We've just left Umeå and we are heading north up the eastern coast of Sweden, aiming to get to the Ice Hotel today. John is currently driving. Apologies for the shades, but it's quite bright. So it's gorgeous weather actually. Clear blue, but some cloud cover very high up. And the scenery is largely unchanged from yesterday actually.
Lots of trees.
Yes, lots of trees. So we've recognised some silver birch, some fir trees. And yes, that's pretty much all we can see at the moment. But we're hoping to get some better scenery the further we go. So impressions, John, of Umeå, where we stayed last night, what do you reckon?
Well, it's a nice hotel. Well, it was one of the more expensive ones we've chosen, but it was bang on where we wanted to be, just short distance off the road and all that sort of thing. Again, like a lot of these Scandinavian towns, they really are built around the bicycle and the walker, and you know, there's very, very little traffic in the heart of the town. So we walked out from the hotel and then just wandered into town. A very pedestrianised, just rack after rack after rack of bicycles. They had some sort of basketball event going on outside the town hall. Loads of kids, and it just, you know, a good vibe and some music.
Loud music, yeah.
Yeah, some music. Found ourselves a cafe and it's out on the outside, and because we are almost getting up towards the Arctic Circle now, of course this time of the year the sun barely sets.
So it's still light at 11:30 at night outside our hotel room.
But weirdly, they did have the lights on outside, which seemed quite strange. But yes, obviously on a timer of some description. But yeah, it's.
I thought the river area at Umeå was lovely, and you know, really wide access to walk and cycle along the river for what seemed like quite a long way.
Yeah, and some very nice looking properties. Around there with river frontage. Reminded me of sort of Henley area, or Henley on Thames or something like that. It's very, very nice.
Yeah, indeed. So I should be driving next shift. Yesterday was my first attempt with putting the Tesla into auto drive. Which is unnerving.
Autopilot, as they call it.
Autopilot. So, to other people like me who didn't know, it will keep in your lane so long as it can determine the white lines on the roads. And that I found really quite unnerving. It was taking up a position further to the left of the lane than I felt comfortable with, but of course had to stop fighting the wheel and just let it do it and try and trust it. So I'll try that again today because I didn't really feel to get the hang of it. And it just made my hands sweaty and nervous. So I'll do that again today. I have to say though, cruise control, I began to get more comfortable with yesterday. John kept reassuring me that the car would brake if the other traffic slowed down in front of me, and that I didn't need to keep hovering over the brake. And I eventually became more accustomed to that, but it's all going really well in terms of, you know, the actual car itself and the navigation system's working well for us. And yeah, so I'm looking forward to some more miles through Scandinavia. And we're hoping tonight to stay at the Ice Hotel. It's one of the oldest ice hotels.
We're not going to be staying in an icy room.
I would quite like that just for the experience, but John has reminded me I get really miserable when I'm cold, number one. I get really miserable when I'm tired, and sleeping on a hard block of ice is probably not going to be conducive to avoiding either of those.
And I don't think there's any ice toilets or anything like that. You can't take your laptop in there, you know, it's just... Yeah, I mean, I've got some mates in the industry that probably could lend me a meat freezer for the night if I really wanted to do something like that. But...
So we're hoping to stay in a warm room at the Ice Hotel.
But we don't have a booking.
No, we don't have a booking because this trip's not exactly been planned. It's been thought about and talked about, but it's not actually been planned the way I would normally plan a road trip.
The problem is not actually that there are no rooms at the Ice Hotel. The problem is that we have a voucher that I was given as a birthday gift that should get us some money off on a particular chain of hotels. Yet activating that voucher does appear to involve numerous steps, so numerous that you would think that they actually didn't want you to achieve it. That type of arrangement.
So yes, at the moment nothing's booked, so we might be sleeping in the car. Who knows?
Who knows? We had a rather sumptuous breakfast at the hotel, so when we had our mid-morning charging stop, we didn't go overboard. We just had a coffee. No, honestly, we just had a coffee.
At some point on this leg of the journey, we cross into the Arctic Circle for the very first time. This means we are 66 degrees north of the equator. And during the summer, the sun remains above the horizon for 24 hours a day, meaning the sun is continuously visible, even at midnight. And that's why it's called the midnight sun.
At our next charging stop, I was amazed to see a rather large Swedish bloke driving what I think was an MG midget. I'm sure someone will tell us in the comments if I'm wrong. He looked so big that if he had to put the soft top up, he probably wouldn't have fitted in the car. Maybe he just drives it on sunny days. Our last charging stop of the day was at Puoltikasvaara. There was a cafe there and we went inside while the car charged. I asked for something typically Swedish and I got presented with the biggest cream bun I think I've ever eaten. It was lovely.
The sat-nav in the car did a great job of getting us to this destination without getting lost, but I can see why people fly across Sweden and land at Corona Airport. The Ice Hotel then has a shuttle bus that picks them up from there, which would have saved quite a lot of time, I'm sure. I'm not sure that John knew, but the Ice Hotel markets itself in the winter as being a wedding venue. Can you imagine how magical that would be?
After checking in at the rather swanky Ice Hotel reception, we dumped our gear in our room. It was one of 4 rooms in a block which had a living roof, and then we headed out.
In the grounds of the hotel are numerous statues. Some are made out of concrete, some are rock, and they depict a number of different sculptures. They're all made by local artists, and I'm told that in the winter months, these are supplemented by literally hundreds of ice sculptures. The space around the ice hotel down towards the Torn River, you can see is a huge area where they build the winter hotel. So there are additional rooms that you can stay in built out of ice during the winter months before it all melts. And during the summer, this hotel have really changed their business to provide forest activities or river activities. So you could have hired paddle boards, canoes, they could take you fishing or river rafting. There were mountain hikes, there were mountain bikes, there were wilderness adventures up into the forest where you could even learn to cook over fire.
Evening meals at the Ice Hotel are served at the Old Homestead restaurant. The area around the restaurant has a number of old wooden buildings, evocative of old Swedish and Sami architecture.
The Sami people are obviously working really hard to keep their heritage and their stories alive. There are Sami people throughout the Arctic Circle, so Sweden, Norway, Greenland, Finland and parts of Russia, I believe. And you did get a sense of their culture and community, that they're trying to bring together that populace and maintain their culture and beliefs. We went into the Nutty Sami Cider Centre and learnt more about their heritage. So we met some real Sami people that still spoke the native language. They made us a coffee over fire within their teepee and talked about the structure of these buildings and how the community would all come together and look after the reindeer. We did go out and see the reindeer grazing in their paddock. It's the closest I've ever been to supposedly wild reindeer, but they seemed comparatively tame and certainly very used to humans.
We were unable to fly the drone at the Ice Hotel because it's in restricted airspace, but the Sami people at the visitor centre said that as long as it didn't upset the reindeer, they would be happy for us to fly it there. We kept the flight duration quite short so that it didn't annoy the animals, but we still got a couple of lovely shots of the town and the surrounding scenery. In this episode, we've decided to change the way we do the stats a bit. We're going to take a look at what a better route planner planned for us, and then take a look at the stats from TESLab and see what we actually achieved. If you think this is a better format, why don't you let us know in the comments and we'll keep it. So the planning software thought that we were going to drive 765 miles, but we actually drove 771. Probably the difference here is that we took a rural route in order to try and see the Baltic Sea. But what we discovered, as often in Sweden, is that there was a forest in the way. The 2-day route was going to take us 12 hours 45 to drive, but it actually took us 13 hours 31, probably because of some hold-ups and just the fact that we weren't achieving the desired average speed all the time. In terms of charging, it was estimated that we'd be charging for 3 hours 53. In the end, we charged for 3 hours 32. Now, this is probably because we were being slightly more efficient because we weren't keeping up the speed that we were supposed to be keeping up. You'll notice that the TESLab software gives us a 77% efficiency rating for our driving. Now, this is basically comparing what we've achieved to what Tesla say you could get out of the car. Now, as we know, when the manufacturers calculate these figures, they are somewhat optimistic as to what you can achieve in the real world. They've probably got a 10-stone driver and they've polished the car to be slipperier than a cornered politician. In terms of costings, the two packages differ slightly. A better route planner tells you what it believes you would pay if you had to pay at the Tesla chargers, which, as you probably know by now, we don't. And so that would have been £116. The TESLab software uses the price of fuel in the UK in June 23 and in effect takes away the £116 to give you what it thinks your saving would have been. In this case, it's claiming a saving of £61.90. The planning software thought we would use about 280 kilowatts of electricity. In the end, we used 260. So again, slightly more efficient, probably because we were going a bit slower and less wind resistance, etc. The figure you can see in TESLab is actually the figure that we've uploaded. And being as they're still charging the battery, it's not specifically relevant here. It's just a slightly different stat that they give. One of the stats that did interest me on the Tesla Lab software was the estimate of how much CO2 we've produced during our charging. It gives a figure of 4 kilograms. Now, if you go and use online calculators for the amount of miles we did, a petrol car would normally come out at something like 340 kilograms for a medium-sized car. So a substantial saving. And that's down to the fact that Sweden's electricity grid is so green, they run their country pretty much off hydroelectric electricity. So let's add the stats from this episode across to the trip stats.
We're about to show you what's coming up in the next episode. But just before we do, why don't you take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the Long Free Ride channel, and perhaps send us a little comment. Let us know you're there. Tell us what you think. Thank you. Meet Albert. He's kind of freaky, but we like that.